All rise. Cosmic Court is now in session. The Honorable Universe presiding. This court does not exist to predict fate. It exists to expose the patterns quietly shaping it. The court is a mirror, not a throne. Tonight's proceedings concern emotional concealment, control disguised as protection, and the increasingly creative ways people avoid themselves. The court now calls its first defendant, Pearl, known throughout the mortal realm as Cancer. The defendant enters the courtroom emotionally perceptive, chronically overwhelmed, and somehow still carrying responsibility for emotions that never belonged to them in the first place. The court notes repeated emotional exhaustion caused by overgiving, overprotecting, and expecting unspoken loyalty in return. Pearl, you stand before this court charged with the following offenses: emotional self-neglect, protective withdrawal through silent resentment, and repeated emotional investment in people unwilling to reciprocate effort. The court submits evidence that the defendant keeps helping people who would not survive a single inconvenience for them. Witnesses report repeated emotional labor performed without request, compensation, or acknowledgement. The defendant calls this love. The court suspects survival conditioning. Pearl continues expecting people to notice emotional distress without directly communicating it. Unfortunately, mind reading remains outside mortal capability. The court has additionally observed the defendant retreating emotionally whenever disappointment occurs, then acting shocked when nobody knows how deeply they were hurt. Silence may protect vulnerability, but it also prevents connection. Pearl is found guilty of abandoning personal emotional needs while obsessively tending to everyone else's. The court acknowledges the defendant's loyalty. However, you cannot keep pouring from a cup you hide in another room. The defendant is hereby ordered to stop mothering people fully capable of disappointing themselves. The court additionally orders direct communication, emotional honesty, and immediate reduction of unpaid therapeutic labor. Pearl is prohibited from saying it's fine when it is very clearly not fine. The defendant is additionally ordered to ask for help before emotional collapse begins, and the court strongly advises learning the difference between love and emotional babysitting. Pearl, you deserve support that does not require exhaustion first. Verdict entered. The court now calls Vex, known to the mortals as Scorpio. The defendant enters the courtroom emotionally guarded, highly observant, and already suspicious of everyone present. The court notes severe trust issues, strategic emotional concealment, and repeated attempts to maintain control through silence. Vex, you stand before this court charged with the following offenses: control preservation through emotional withholding, punitive silence, and repeated weaponization of unspoken expectations. The court submits evidence that the defendant says nothing's wrong immediately after something is very obviously wrong. The defendant continues testing loyalty through emotional mind games instead of direct communication. The court would like to remind Vex confusion is not intimacy. The court has further observed repeated emotional retaliation disguised as detachment. The defendant claims they are protecting themselves. The court suspects fear of vulnerability. Vex is found guilty of attempting to maintain emotional power by avoiding emotional exposure. The court acknowledges the depth of the defendant's emotional perception. However, control is not the same thing as safety. The defendant is hereby ordered to communicate directly instead of constructing emotional escape rooms. The court additionally orders vulnerability without interrogation tactics. Vex is prohibited from punishing people for failing tests they never knew existed. The defendant must express one honest emotional need without sarcasm, disappearance, or strategic silence. Vex, love cannot survive where vulnerability is treated like a liability. Verdict entered. The court now calls Riot, known to the mortals as Aquarius. The defendant enters the courtroom emotionally detached, philosophically overprepared, and already arguing with the concept of authority itself. The court notes chronic emotional distancing disguised as independence. Riot, you stand before this court charged with the following offenses: emotional detachment through intellectual superiority, avoidance of vulnerability, and excessive identification with personal independence. The court submits evidence that the defendant disappears emotionally the moment genuine intimacy approaches. Riot continues analyzing emotions instead of participating in them. The court would like to remind the defendant, understanding feelings is not the same thing as feeling them. The defendant repeatedly claims not to need anyone, while quietly hoping someone notices they are struggling. Riot is found guilty of using emotional distance as self-protection. The court acknowledges the defendant's intelligence. However, isolation is not freedom. The defendant is hereby ordered to stop pretending emotional needs are a design flaw. Riot is prohibited from ghosting emotionally difficult conversations. The defendant must remain present long enough to be known. Riot, connection does not weaken you. Verdict entered.